Welcome to the talk show, Lighting the Educational Flame, with your host, Mark Hoberman. The goal of this show is to provide a learning experience to people of all ages, with guests from various fields and academics, a wide range of industries, and insight into the many forms of art, athletics, and entertainment. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to the talk show, Lighting the Educational Flame, brought to you by Great Success Education. I'm your host, Mark Hoberman. Today, my co-host is the one, the only, Susan Brenda.
Well, thanks for calling me the one and only. I appreciate it, Mark.
You got it. Got a special guest today in the film industry, which has really taken quite a hit, obviously, during the pandemic. But we have a director with us today, so I'm expecting some exciting news from him.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. He's going to talk about the challenges of being in the film business because, needless to say, it isn't easy, even if there's no pandemic.
Right. It was hard way before the word pandemic was a word. So for sure, difficult things, but he's doing some great projects. He has a new project that's coming out now, and very exciting stuff. So let's bring him on.
Okay.
Our guest today is director Arthur Kanegis. Arthur, welcome to Lighting the Educational Flame.
Very pleased to be here with you.
Thank you so much again. Arthur, what was the path that actually led you to become a movie director? Nobody wakes up as a little kid and says, hey, let me direct movies, unless you did. So what was the path that led you down that road?
Well, you know, many people become movie directors because of their passion for movies. I became a movie director because of my passion for communicating with people how we can build a better world. I was working, well, my parents inspired me from from a very young age to want to build a peaceful and more positive future. My parents actually met at a meeting in Washington, D.C. at the Quaker Meeting House to integrate a lunch counter on 14th Street to plan a sit-in. So my parents were involved from when I was young in trying to bring us together across races and across the world. So I first started out, working in Washington, D.C. with organizations, well, first with the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker organization working with around the world to build peace. And I did their media programs. I did early documentaries before we even had VHS and all that. It was slide tape documentaries at that point. I did one called called the Automated Air War, about how about the company ads and so on, producing these weapons, highly mechanized weapons used against the peasants in Vietnam. And then we would have like an ad from Westinghouse. You can be sure of it's Westinghouse, and it would show a kid whose leg was blown off by a Westinghouse mine. And we were using this to build opposition to the Vietnam War. And then I also began to do the same thing with working on the nuclear issue. I worked for a group of retired admirals and generals who were speaking out for peace. Admiral Iraq was head of it. And I produced a film for them called War Without Winners, which was with Paul Newman was the host. And it was a way of waking people up to the dangers of nuclear war, but also showing them how ordinary human beings in the U.S. and the Soviet Union, connecting us as people, that we don't have to be divided by these divides and threatening to blow up our world over things that are not really fundamental. Our fundamental thing is that we all want a world of security for our kids. We all want a better life in the future, and we can find ways to pull together on those things. So it's been a mission of making films, not because of just a desire to be a film director, but because this is how we best communicate to people.
Arthur, I'm very interested. And, you talked about Vietnam and you talked about all of these other things. Were you a peacenik, a person who really believed in the fact that we should not be at war, and in fact that we should be in a situation where we really, at this point in our lives, in this point, I'm talking about 2021 now, where there should be peace, not the kind of thing that's happening in our country and the riots? Are you going to do anything about that? Are you going to produce something that really talks about the divisiveness of what's going on in our world today?
Well, divisiveness is exactly the key of what we're talking about, that that somehow these old broken political systems are pitting us against each other. And in fact, there are much better ways to do things. If you take people from any side of a political dispute, Republicans and Democrats, Arabs and Israelis, and so on, and you bring them into certain kinds of conversational discussions where you're not saying who's right and who's wrong, because then you're fighting it out, but you're talking about, okay, what each person, you have kind of a controlled thing like revolutionary conversations, or there's a million different protocols for taking a group through a dynamic where you identify, well, what is it that you each really want? What is it what is your story? What brought you to where you are? What is it that and you start finding when you ask what is that we really want, that everybody wants, a better world for their children. They want a safe and secure future. They want to have a sense of purpose in their life, that they're doing something worthwhile. And people on both sides of these wars, each one of them is so motivated by their love of humanity and the people around them. They say, I'm willing to give up my life to care for, because I'm so passionate about caring for the people around me and making it better. And the people on the other side are doing the same thing. And here we are, passionate about trying to do something good, and we're killing each other. Whoops, there's something wrong here, folks. Let's step back and start looking at what really brings us together as people, as a planet. And that's kind of the mission. And that's what I'm already making a film. I already have a film out on 100 PBS affiliates right now. That does help us draw together across divides and at the global level.
Well, Arthur, just quickly, I want to piggyback on something you said. The topic that you're talking about and that Susan brings up, it's not an easy topic to discuss, let alone to direct. So I'm sure with these kind of topics, what are some of the struggles that you've had along the way?
Well, lots of struggles. For instance, well, of course, financial is the biggest one. When I first launched doing this current film we're doing, theworldismycountry.com, I spent a couple of years doing foundation grants, applications, trying to get funding from other people, and really finally found that no one could catch the vision and the power that I saw in this story. So I ended up, we sold the family home I'd grown up into, and I used funds both to help my siblings and then some of the money to help launch this project. And we of course held GoFundMe's, and we were very successful. We had an Indiegogo, and we had friends and family, people kicking in funds, but we didn't get any of the foundation or any of the any of the institutional grants. It all was we the people kind of putting it together, and so it was a longer process. But I'm very grateful to the fellow Rotarians and others who helped to fund getting it going.
Mark, I want to ask you something. When you listen to what Arthur has to say about the difficulty of funding, you and I know a little bit more about that. Now, if we were doing, or if Arthur was doing something that really talked about the political situation going on today, do you think that he would find the ability to really capture a story and then be able to sell it? Because you know how hard it is, right?
Yeah, it's definitely based on the target audience, what the goals are, and who's funding it and why they're funding it. Some people fund things just because they want the marketing gig to come out of it and that kind of notoriety, and others want to really do the message. So it seems to me that the projects that I know Arthur has done and what he's spoken about here and what I've read about him is that this strong passion drives him. So I personally believe that anything Arthur wanted to do, he would find the funding for. It wouldn't be easy, but I think he'd find the funding for. So what can you tell us about your passion for directing The World Is My Country? And I'm sorry, before you answer that, I have to tell you that this is very, almost looks predictable, because I cannot believe how timely something that started 60 plus years ago fits into what's going on now. So The World Is My Country, great story in and of itself, but it connects so much, unfortunately in some ways, to what's going on today. So just tell us all about that project.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me tell you that as a movie director, I think the key is story. There's so many people who are, we have two kinds of people. One person side who's passionate about story, but they don't care if the story's got very bad, you learn horrible things. You learn to hate each other, fight, kill, whatever. And there's other people who want to try to make a movie to propagandize, and they try to lecture people. And people don't want to be lectured. That doesn't get anywhere. They try to just give them the facts and figures. What I'm kind of doing is a blend of them. What I was looking for was a really riveting, fun, engaging, fascinating, incredible story that also, in the process of telling that story, shifts our thinking, gives us a clue to the new way of thinking, inspires us to think about the world a different way. And that's when I discovered the amazing story of world citizen #1, Gary Davis. Now, what's intriguing about this guy is he wasn't here to politicize. He started out, he was a song and dance man on Broadway. He stood in for the famous Danny Kaye, doing those rapid fire double talk numbers, and the audiences loved him. He was on his way to a Broadway career. He had no thought about, trying to convince the world of anything. But then what happened is World War II came along, and he finds himself in a bomber plane, and he's bombing the city of Brandenburg. And his own brother has just been killed in that same war. And he comes back from the bombing mission, and he sees the pictures of the damage, and he says, why, my God, why am I killing these other people in their homes and schools and factories? Because they're on the wrong side of some invisible line I can't see from the air. And so he understood the pain that those mothers and brothers and all were going through, because he's going through it at the same time. And he comes back and he sees footage of Hiroshima, and he says, my God, what if I'm recalled to active duty to bomb Moscow? I've got to do something. And so what can I do? I'm an actor, I'm not he reads an incredible book, Anatomy of Peace, and discovers that humanity has actually already invented something that eliminates war. And what is it? It's called law. And that is, inside countries with one government, even while we might have hatreds and fights, we don't blow up whole cities. When for example, the Oklahoma City bomber blew up the federal building, and they didn't. Oklahoma didn't declare war on Michigan for harboring the Michigan militia. It's handled as a criminal justice thing. And he said, whatever the divisions we have, whether it's invasion of the Capitol or anything else, it's handled as a criminal justice thing. It's not retaliation. We'll go blow up your side because you did this to our side. And so he said, well, look, we need that system at the global level, but how do we do that? So what happened is he went to Paris, because in 1948, the United Nations was meeting not in New York. It hadn't been built yet there. They had that meeting in Paris, and he leaps up in the middle of the session and he pulls off this grand act of political theater. He says, the nations you represent divide us and lead us to the brink of total war. And he says, we need one government for one world. And if you won't do it, step aside, and a people's world assembly will arise from our ranks to do it. So he had this vision of the people of the world coming together to create a new form of law for our planet that could outlaw war, could outlaw things like, later in his life, global warming, the destruction of our global environment, outlaw the things that could make humanity go extinct, and at the same time preserve our democratic freedoms. So what happened, incredibly, was that his act of courage inspired Albert Einstein and Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus and all these famous writers and intellectuals to come to his defense and to join him in this call. And 20,000 people rallied with him in the Velodrome on December 9th, 1948, demanding that the United Nations, this new United Nations, would honor and preserve and protect the rights of humanity. And the very next day, the Soviets, who had been adamantly opposing Eleanor Roosevelt's proposed Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they stepped aside and let it get passed unanimously. And now we have this incredible declaration. You should read it, everybody, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And for the first time ever, the nations of the world recognize that all of us human beings have rights and freedoms. It used to be like the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. had, as part of our Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But now here was a Bill of Rights for the world, and many nations are not honoring it. But Gary says that's because we don't have any law to enforce it. We do have treaties, like the UN Charter is a treaty, and this is traditional world law. So is the Kellogg-Briand Pact outlawing war is law, but we don't enforce it because there's no way of governing at the global level. And what Gary said is it doesn't have to be government over us. Government should be a service under we the people. And he said we can break out of these old ways of thinking, that it has to be the incredible advances that were made in 1776, where we would send somebody, we would hold a little meeting, we'd have an election, we'd send somebody by horse and buggy to represent us in a distant city. He'd say, we don't have to send representatives. Today, we can all meet in the same room, the global room. We're doing it with these little Zoom meetings. And he said, why don't we invent a new system of government where you bring together, like we were talking about, people on opposite sides of political issues into like these Zoom kind of conferences, and you have a menu of tools that help you come to a synergy. He called it syntegrity. It's a synergy with integrity. Synergy is a step beyond. There's win-lose democracy. One side wins, 49%, lose, 51% win. There's, compromise. We each give a little bit, try to come to a conclusion we can all agree on. There's consensus, getting a general sense of me. But above that is synergy, where we meet and come together, come up with something better than any of us imagined when we first came into the room. Synergy is out of that interaction, something new is born. And he said, if we can get people into these, even before we had the internet, he invented, but when the internet came along, he got very excited. He lived until 2013. And he was saying, get people together in these kind of interactive relationship things, and let us all bring up what is it, the will of the people at the global level. The universal, almost every constitution says that, as ours says, that it's based on, we the people are the ones who create government. It says in our Declaration of Independence, it is the right of the people to institute new government. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, again, the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. So he says, hey, folks, we're the ones who are supposed to be governing. We're not the governed. We're not the oppressed. We're the governors of our little planet. Let's step up to the plate, folks, and do it. So a very big challenge.
I'll tell you something, Arthur. It's very interesting that you brought that up. First of all, I'm very proud to say that it was my uncle who started the Human Rights Commission to the United Nations with Eleanor Roosevelt. So needless to say, I really understand the whole notion of humanitarians getting together and really looking for peace. And the other thing I wanted to tell you is that years ago, I interviewed the Freedom Riders. Now, what was interesting is that there were whites, there were blacks, there were all kinds of people, and they were looking for peace, and they were marching, and even though people were throwing rocks at them, they didn't care. But we have a nation today where there is divisiveness and there are problems, and people need to address this. If you had an opportunity, I know what you're doing right now, but if you had an opportunity to do something else to really convince people that it's so important that they come together, what would you do?
Well, I would say the thing that we most need now, really, it's incredible. When things get really bad, what we need is a new story. And that is that I think what brings people together more than facts and figures and so on is riveting emotional stories that draw them into them. And I actually, the next project I'd love to do would be a Netflix series, but turning into a transmedia project where we actually picture a positive future that works. What does it look like? If our idea of the kind of future we'd like to create, what Gary called a people-powered planet, if that could come into being, what would it look like? How would we? How could kids every week dwell in living in this future? How Star Trek kind of took us into visualizing these peacekeepers in a way all over the planet, all over the universe, trying to solve things. Well, what about a future right here on Earth where we see a positive interactive thing that kids could be watching, enjoying, playing the games, having the dolls, the toys, the video games, all about dwelling in the future that we want. If we can spark kids' imaginations with a vision of what they want, humans are an incredibly creative species. Gary says this in the film. If we can give them the vision, then the kids of today, they can become the James Madisons and Dolly Madisons of a new way of running our world. By the way, Dolly was an incredible character herself. She was a Quaker also, and the first woman to be actually given an honorary seat in the Congress, and did a lot for bringing exactly what you're talking about. While her husband, James, would be one party versus the other, she went across the parties and brought the parties together and said, hey, let's all interact. So take a look at the history of Dolly Madison, but we can be the James and Dolly Madisons. James Madison was the key architect behind the Constitution. Let's the kids of this world be the key architects of creating a new constitution for the world. And we actually talk about that in our People Powered Planet podcast. We have one with a bunch of people getting together to create an Earth Constitution. So yeah, we can all have fun together, building a better future, visualizing, picturing it, and then having it draw us to it. People are fear is a temporary motivator. It can make us, try to escape the pain, but then it doesn't give us a vision of how we then build the positive alternative. And so by creating that vision, that picture, that's how we draw people into using the incredible genius and spark we have to invent things. We do that in the physical world. Now we have to do it, the same inventiveness in the world of politics and of the survival of our planet.
Well, Arthur, I love the fact that you talked about young people. This is an educational show. I was an educator for over 3 decades. I want them also to know, I mean, I've seen some one man and one woman shows. I never would have dreamt that a person in his 90s could hold my attention for that long with such riveting information, such a story. But people have to know that protests help and all these things, but he really was an army of one in the beginning. He didn't have a team of 150 people behind him marching down the street, or 1,500 people, or 15,000, to do this notion of world citizenship. And, it leads me to my next question, because I know Martin Sheen, when he introduces this, calls it a roadmap to a better future. And I think that based on the answer you just gave, in closing, I know you said what you'd like to do, but what are some of your upcoming projects that we know you're going to do in your roadmap to the future?
Well, right now, if you come to theworldismycountry.com and click on public TV, you will see a list of 100 public PBS affiliates across the country that are currently broadcasting the film. If you find in your city that you've missed it, or it's not in that particular location, right there on the site, you'll be able to sign up to watch it and get to see this incredible story. And then we'll also let you know, if you're an educator, how you can bring this program into your schools. We actually are working with on a teacher's guide with PBS Learning Media. And that's going to be available for teachers and others to help bring the story and to help spark kids' imaginations with, that key question. If you were the James or Dolly Madisons of a new way of running the world, what would it be, kids? Well, think about it. What would you like to see in the future? How would you do it? What kind of constitution would you be writing for the world? That's a great question for students to start thinking about and to debate. And then there are things like model UNs, but this goes beyond that. What if we stepped beyond a model UN and just created a new model of where we people actually took seriously our founders when they said it's the right of the people to institute new government? Were they talking about, old guys in gray wigs, or were they talking about you and I? And if kids got the idea, hey, we kids, we can actually create something new, a better way to run our world. Go kids, let's do it.
Yeah. Mark, it's a very interesting thing that he's saying. You have access to a lot of kids. And if you had an opportunity, like he is saying, tell the kids what they can do to start to have a better world, because we need it. I mean, right now, there's so much problems and so much chaos. And I think somebody like you, Mark, and somebody like you, Arthur, can really spread the word. So if you were just give me a little bit, if you were to spread the word to the kids and to the parents, what would you tell them right succinctly?
What I would tell them, or what Arthur would tell them? What I would tell them?
Both of you.
I would tell them, this is not your mother's Model UN, because the teens who did Model UN for decades, this is the Model UN on steroids. This is really meeting the kids at their reality, not how things were done in the past. I love the way Arthur is pushing this. to the future by using the words of Gary Davis from the past. So that's a connection I see that would really spark interest among parents, students, and teachers.
Yeah, I think Gary Davis, the story of Gary Davis is kind of a lost piece of history. Everybody who sees this movie says, wow. I even had someone say, did this guy really exist? Did you make this up? You know, because people haven't heard this history. It's a lost piece of history, as Martin Sheen said, as you quoted, gives us a roadmap to a better future. Many people in some of the articles at the time said that Gary was, you know, half a decade ahead of his time. And I think the time is here. I think now with the internet, kids are growing up connected around the world. They're not thinking about, oh, I'm just you know, all these divisions we're seeing in the world. Many of the young people don't feel them. They feel like, you know, we're all people, and they cross, and we're actually seeing an incredible ferment and shift happening in our world. While it looks like it's a tough time, it's actually an incredible time. We've never had such a diversity of races and so on in government. We've never had such a growing role of women in the world being leaders and taking on that leadership. You know, and following in the footsteps of some of the early pioneers who, like the founder of Mother's Day, in fact, was an amazing 1870 proclamation for women standing up for peace in the world. And you know, we do have we're in a time of ferment, and sometimes in the middle of that time of ferment, it looks discouraging, but really these are the most exciting time, folks. This is the time when shift is happening, change is happening, and young people are the key. Just take a look at Greta and her talking to the UN, this courageous stand she took, and how that's helped rivet people around the world. Well, each of you can be the Gretas and the Dolly Madisons and the sparks, the Gary Davises of sparking a better way to run our world. And all it takes is the passion and believing in yourself and your ability to communicate and share that, you know, and then once you have that passion, you can find the tools to do it. There's incredible resources on the internet and everything else to learn. You know, if you want to learn filmmaking, if you want to learn how to be a communicator, it's all there. You just have to have the spark and the passion and the drive, and find that inner power within you and bring it out to the world.
Absolutely great. Great way to close the show, Arthur. Arthur Kanegis, Director of The World Is My Country. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story and Gary Davis's story. Susan, thanks for hopping in today as well. And
Absolutely.
to the viewers, don't forget to tune into our next show. This is Mark Hoberman, thanking you for watching Lighting the Educational Flame, and have a great day.
Thank you for watching Lighting the Educational Flame. To contact Mark Hoberman, email him at info@gradesuccess.com or visit him on social media through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thank you for watching Lighting the Educational Flame.